Picture this. You're a king in 9th century medieval England. Life's pretty good, until a horde of fearsome Vikings shows up to ruin your day. They've overrun your kingdom, captured you, and now you're sitting in a tent, waiting for the inevitable. You figure, okay, probably the chopping block. It'll be quick. I'll say my prayers, become a martyr, and head straight to heaven. Simple enough, right? But you've seriously underestimated the, let's say, brutal creativity of your captors. You soon learn they're not just going to execute you. No, they plan on pulling your ribs and lungs out through your back to make you look like some kind of winged creature. Suddenly, the chopping block sounds like a spa day. That, my friends, is the Blood Eagle. And today, we're diving deep into this nasty piece of Viking history. So, how did it supposedly work? First, the victim is laid face down, back exposed to the sky. Maybe they still think it's a beheading, the standard practice in Anglo-Saxon England. We don't know if they were told what was coming. The old Viking texts are a bit light on the details. We have to assume they were held down, either by several strong men or tied securely. This wasn't just an execution, it was a ritual. It would have happened in a special place, with a big crowd of Viking warriors watching. Then, the executioner approaches, holding a very sharp knife, or maybe even an axe. In some accounts, an eagle would first be carved into the victim's back, just a little appetizer. Then, with incredible force, the executioner would slice through the flesh along the spine, severing the ribs. These ribs would then be pried outwards, bent until they resembled a pair of gruesome wings. And for the grand finale, the lungs would be pulled out through the opening and draped over the rib wings, their final movements supposedly mimicking the fluttering of a bird. Hence, the Blood Eagle. It sounds almost too horrific to be real. So, how do we even know about this? Well, the Vikings had poets, just like many ancient cultures. They composed something called skaldic poetry. These poems became part of the saga's epic stories, detailing Viking invasions, legendary kings, and bloody battles. Some of these sagas have survived and been translated. One of these is the Orkneyinga saga, which tells the story of Harald Fairhair, said to be the first king of Norway. He's the guy credited with the Viking takeover of the Orkney and Shetland Islands. If you're not sure where those are, they're an archipelago, a group of islands just north of mainland Scotland. See, we're not just about blood and guts here. You're getting a geography lesson too. Now, this saga was written in the 13th century, a few hundred years after King Harold's time, so some scholars question its complete accuracy. Details could have been passed down by word of mouth, and, as we know, stories can change over time. Anyway, one of Harold's sons, a warrior named Halfdan Longleg, got himself into some trouble. He was involved in a power struggle and killed a Viking nobleman along with 60 other men. His brother was banished, but Halfdan wasn't so lucky. The son of the man he killed demanded revenge. He wanted the Blood Eagle performed on Halfdan as a sacrifice to the god Odin. The translated text from the saga describes it like this. Erlinor went up to Halfdan and cut the Blood Eagle on his back in this fashion that he thrust his sword into his chest by the backbone and severed all the ribs down to the loins and then pulled out the lungs. And that was Halfdan's death. That's Exhibit A. Exhibit B involves another legendary Viking warrior, Ivar the Boneless, son of the famous Ragnar Lothbrek. Why boneless? Historians have a few theories. Some think it might be a reference to a physical disability, while others suggest it meant he was a bit lacking in other departments. But what he may have lacked physically, he more than made up for in strategic brilliance. This was during the Viking conquest of Anglo-Saxon England, chronicled in the tale of Ragnar's Sons. It details the fate of Kingla of Northumbria in northern England. Now, if you've seen the show Asterix Vikings, and aren't caught up, spoiler alert, plug your ears. One version of the story says Kingla captured Ragnar and had him thrown into a pit of snakes. Naturally, Ivar the Boneless wanted revenge, but he was too smart to attack Northumbria's strong army head-on. He bided his time. He stayed in England and asked King Gla for a wargeld, a type of compensation for his father's death. He told Gla all he wanted was a single ox's hide, and only the land he could stretch it around. Gley probably thought he was a fool, but clever Ivar cut the hide into a single, incredibly thin strip and stretched it around a huge piece of land, which he claimed would be a new city, supposedly the future site of York, with his new base. Ivar won over local chieftains, built a powerful army, and finally moved against Gley. He captured the king, and according to an 11th century poem, this is what happened. Anavar, the one who dwelt at York, had Gley's back cut with an eagle. A bit vague, right, but another account is more explicit. They caused the bloody eagle to be carved on the back of Gley, and they cut away all of the ribs from the spine, and then they ripped out his lungs. So, did the blood eagle actually happen? The honest answer is, we don't know for sure. Any historian who tells you with 100% certainty that it did, or didn't, wasn't there. Some scholars argue that Norse poets were often symbolic and metaphorical, not literal. Then again, a 12th century Danish poet also wrote about turning people into eagles, and in his version, they even poured salt into the open wounds for good measure. The theme was definitely out there, but the sagas were written hundreds of years after the events they describe. We all know how stories get exaggerated over time. A minor scuffle can become an epic brawl by the end of the week. Were these stories of Viking brutality stretched to make them sound even more fearsome? Or were they accurate accounts of a truly terrifying ritual? The debate among scholars continues. But for the sake of a good story, we won't let the facts get in the way. Whew! That was pretty intense. I hope you're not too worn out after all that. If you enjoyed this dark dive into history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.